Welcome to TimeXtender Tuesdays and this episode on how to build a data lake in under 10 minutes. I'm Stefan Ahlbom, Solution Specialist at TimeXtender. Organizations, they want to be data-driven. They want to make decisions based on data. And they have loads of data. They have CRM data, ERP data, logistics data, sales data. But all that data is stuck in different data sources. And those data sources, they come in different formats. Well, they have SQL databases, others will provide you with JSON outputs from an API, others will give you fixed length text files ending up on an SFTP somewhere. And it's difficult for those organizations to actually connect to all these data sources. A data lake would give you one single storage location and data in a single format, giving those data scientists and analysts and data engineers access to that organizational data, providing the organization with greater insights. And not only that, a data lake would be updated regularly with data from these different data sources, providing the organization with the ability to be agile. They will be able to adjust according to the market that changes so rapidly nowadays. But furthermore, a data lake would give tools for machine learning and data mining and predictive analytics access to that organizational data, meaning that the organization can test different scenarios and predict what the future would look like, giving them an upper hand in the market. But it's difficult to build a data lake. You need to predict or plan ahead, meaning that you probably need to know how much your data is going to increase during the years. You often need to predict how often you should load the data. Should you load the full data or just incremental loading? Should you need a scheduler to set up that incoming data on a regular basis? And what tools should you use for this? Or should you go with hand coding? Well, the setup that you use, would that also be able to handle the changes that the data sources will have during the years? Because we know that those data sources, they will change. Well, we're heading down that road. We're building a data lake, and we're going to do it in under 10 minutes using TimeXtender. With TimeXtender, you set up the environment in the portal. So we'll set up an ODX, that operational data exchange, that builds and then maintains that data lake. And we'll also add a data source, of course, so that we can bring in that data. We'll jump into the desktop and we'll set up that transfer tasks, the incremental loading only to bring in that new and fresh data. And we'll also, of course, add a scheduler so that we get data incoming on a regular basis. First, we'll open up that portal, but we'll also need to have a timer, of course, meaning so we can see that we actually do this in under 10 minutes. Challenge is on. I'll start that one up. So the ODX is one of the instance types that we have, and I've actually set up the ODX development for us so that you don't need to see me type in all these information needed, but we'll go through what I've done here. So first of all, I've named my ODX to ODX development. We're going to bring in some patient data. We're creating a Azure data lake storage, as it is a data lake that we are set out to create or build. We're giving TimeXtender access to our storage account. We're adding the credentials to the data lake, and we're also going to create a storage container that's called DL sensitive, data lake sensitive, as it's patient data. But we also need a data source, of course. So we're jumping over to data sources. And here we have the 250 ready-made connectors that TimeXtender provides. And here we have APIs, we have files, we have different types of containers like the S3. We have different products as well that we could use, but we're bringing in and using the TimeXtender SQL data source connector. And in the same way as we did with the ODX, I've already set up this a little bit so that you don't need to see me actually editing all those fields and entering all that credentials and stuff. So here we have the name of the data source, patient data, highly sensitive patient data. I'm adding the connection settings. It's a server, SQL server. We have Windows authentication and the credentials to actually let TimeXtender access this data. And the beauty here is we could have set up a user to the portal and sent a link to the owner of this data source, and having them actually enter all these credentials, meaning that they don't need to share those passwords and credentials with a consultant, perhaps an external consultant like me. Now, we also need to add this to our ODX. So we're heading back into the ODX development, scrolling down a little bit, and here we can add that patient data to our ODX. So we've now mapped our patient data to our ODX. We have a user, that is me, that's got access to this ODX development with the patient data. And with that, we can jump over to the desktop. We need to reload to actually get that information from the portal into our desktop. And I can open up my ODX development, and I also need to jump into the edit and create that storage space. Successfully created. Let's test it. Functioning and well. Let's jump in here and add our data source. And this is, of course, the data source that we mapped, the patient data. Patient data. And here is that data source. If we had more mapped in the portal, they would show up here as well. Now I want to be able to select the tables and check that I actually bring in only what is needed. So here are all the tables of that data source. I want, as I mentioned, this is patient data. I want to secure that I'm actually only bringing in what's needed. So I'm bringing in the address, the person information, and the phone information. You can see these tables contain 4, 13, and 9 columns. I'll jump into the person just to make sure that I've got what I needed here. And this is really good. I'm not the owner of this data source, so I can actually view a preview of the data. Now, looking into this, it looks good enough. It looks really good. Scrolling to the right, and I see here email promotion. That is not something that I want to have in my patient data lake. So I'll remove that, not bringing that into my data lake. And yes, a transfer task is, of course, what brings in that data to the data lake. Transfer patient, like so. And I've already selected exactly what I want to bring in. So TimeXtender synchronizes to check the metadata of that data source. Then I can execute and bring that data into the data lake. I can even jump into my Azure storage here. I can refresh, and now we have our container here, the DL sensitive that we created or told TimeXtender to create in the portal. Looking down into the file structure here, first comes the model JSON file that I can actually view and see exactly what this data file contains, and then actually look at the real data file, the Parquet file that those data scientists and analysts, this is what they want. So this is a full load, since this is the first time I'm bringing in the data. So this contains all the data of the data source. And with a patient data, this might make sense, bringing in full load. So all the time I could do that. I could set up a scheduler and bringing in all full loads all the time. That would bring me or give me a version of the files historically. And that might make sense with patient data due to regulations and so forth. But we're of course going to set up incremental loading. So jumping back into the desktop, setting up incremental loading. And here I could of course use a patient ID or something like that. But I'm going to use modified date. And what we have down here, the subtract from value, this actually looks at the data that we've already brought in and comparing that to the data source that we have, checking if something has changed since we brought in that data. Since this is actual persons, the patients are actually persons, that data could actually change. Persons change name, they change phone numbers or address or something like that. So we'll actually update the data from the past 24 hours. Then we have the primary keys. We can handle those, and this looks if something in this data actually changed over time as well, taking care of that updates. We refresh. Now I can see that I probably misspelled that, modify it date, like so. Jumping back, refreshing, and now we see that we're bringing in all those 3 tables that I said that I wanted to bring into my data lake. And this is fantastic. I don't have to set up incremental loading for each and every table. This setup is valid for all my data sources setup. But I also need to add a scheduler. So adding a job, call that the ODX patient, like so. Bringing in my development, and here I have my patient data. Simply drag and dropping that over. And here you also see that I use the synchronize, and what TimeXtender does is actually look at the data source and look at the metadata, and then it will compare that to the last time we did this, to the last load that we did from the data source. And it will compare any schematic changes, and if it finds that, if we have a new data field, TimeXtender will actually do a full load of that data, giving us new fresh load, securing that everything is up to date. And then of course continue with that incremental loading. And of course we need to say when we actually want this to be updated as well. So let's start off at 5 in the morning. We want to do this all days of the week. Patients keep coming in. And we want this to be updated on a regular basis. So every 5 minutes, we want to have fresh data in our data lake. And we're actually set up. We're all ready to go with time to spare. So jumping back to my dashboard as well. So what we have done is actually look at the data sources we had. We have 250 ready-made connectors. We use the TimeXtender SQL Database connector to that data source, mapping that to our ODX, bringing in a transfer task. We set up an incremental load, and we set up a scheduler as well, bringing in that data. Thank you for your attention.